to something in Imagery, and that feeling is the one that your client has right now, you can create an instant and lasting connection with them. So when they feel that tug again, they're going to think of you. And that is super valuable. Like, I would consider it to be priceless.
Welcome back to another episode of Personal Brand Blueprint. Today, we're going to talk about something that is crucial within personal branding and within content creation. And that's kind of finding the magic words to use that's going to speak to your audience and get them to actually take action. I know a lot of us struggle with this idea of when we're creating social posts, newsletters, blog posts. It's like, what's the right format to use? What's the right language to use? How do I sound like me in my content? And also, like, how does maybe AI play into this, if at all? I've been hearing this word buzzing around. So that's why today I have on Kristin Spencer, value-based marketing consultant and business nonfiction ghostwriter at Literary Symmetry, where Kristin helps her clients know which words to use to show up with more clarity and confidence to increase sales and influence. So Kristin, welcome to the show.
Dave, thank you so much for having me on. I am super excited to be here today. And it's always fun to talk to people in the same industry.
For sure. Yeah, when we can talk the same talk, we know each other's pains that we go through as well, and get to trade some war stories. So speaking of, like, I want to get into your story, but I first want to kind of tee up what we're going to talk about today, which is really just the idea of like copywriting, knowing the right words to use, content formats and such. Tell me, like, when we're thinking about content creation, what is like the importance of why it's necessary that we become quality writers, or at least use a resource that is a quality writers when we're creating our content?
Yeah, so first, I'd love to distinguish between content writing and copywriting, because content is words that are meant to build your reputation and to establish who you are, while copywriting are words that are actually built to perform a super specific task. So when people come to me and they're like, "Oh, are you a content writer?" I'm like, "I do not write content. I can send you to someone who's amazing. But actually, if you're having someone write content for you and you're writing your own copy, or you're working with a copywriter and they don't have a common knowledge of how your business voice sounds, what kind of offers are important to you, what your personal touchstone principles are, you are going to cause the mistrust in the people who would want to purchase from you to go up. And in marketing in general, the thing that we're battling the most fiercely against is purchaser mistrust. They've been in a situation where someone has promised them something before that has not come to fruition. And so that's the single biggest goal of any writing that we do as a business.
Sure. Yeah, we're in what they say, a trust recession right now.
We are.
Yeah. So we'll get into some of those tactics and strategies a little bit to make sure that we're earning the trust from our audiences. But I first want to go back to day one. So obviously you're the pro you are today, but how did we get into copywriting and, this editorial world that you live in now?
Yeah, so I have been in the professional writing world for over 15 years at this point, and I actually started out as a travel mom blogger back before this was a huge thing. My claim to fame was I had a tutorial that taught you how to take a newborn's picture so that you could actually get it approved to get a passport. Because I had gone through 3 rejections, I knew a lot of other parents had been having the same problem, and so I showed them how to use rolled up towels using images and text to successfully take those photos so their family could travel. And I was writing twice a week for this blog. And that's when some of my friends peer pressured me into writing a book about confidence, because they saw my own journey of deciding, hey, I actually want to be a confident woman, especially as the mom to 2 daughters. And I was pregnant with my son at the time. And so I was like, all right, well, I've been writing. And then I realized, oh, I can write. So I created Literary Symmetry in 2018 as a way to provide for my family while still being around for my kids. We had been through a really rough transition where we moved from Athens, Greece, where we had lived for 7 years, back to California every week, twice a week, and creating all this content. And so that's how my first book came about. It was an accidental bestseller. I sold over 30,000 copies to deal with the loss of a loved one. And then we moved to Pennsylvania, where my husband had a job offer that after 3 months completely fell through. So I didn't want another unknown in the lives of my kids. And every person that wanted to hire me was like, okay, you're going to work 7 to 7. I'm like, what? No, I don't want to do that. I can't do that. My kids are going through this time of transition. They really need me around. And so I started my own business, and it was a fiction editing co-op. So I became a certified copy editor. I had already been developmental editing for years. And fast forward to COVID, and I know we have COVID fatigue, but this is part of my story. I lost all my clients. They all dropped out of their contracts. And instead of holding them to those contracts, I thought, the world is a scary place right now. Writing the fiction book you've always dreamed of doesn't seem like it's worth the expense. I understand. So I let every single client out of their contract. But I still had, my team. I still had my family, and my husband couldn't work. And we didn't have any opportunity to have government subsidies at that point. And I was like, well, we have our house and we have the student rental that we thought was such a good investment that's been sitting vacant. And if I can't get $1,000 by next week, the pipes in my house and the pipes in that building are going to burst, and we're going to have way more to deal with. So out of necessity, I kept remembering the things that people had been telling me who were also in the fiction world. They said, Kristin, you really should try copywriting. You would probably be amazing at it because you understand how words are formulated into stories. And that's like the number one thing you need to understand. So I did this challenge that was 10 days to 1K, which was the amount of money I needed to keep the pipes from freezing. And it worked. I got the $1,000. I paid the heating bills. And that about 3 months later, I had my first 10K month. And I took all of the money that I had been making, and I was just going on Upwork, right? I was just taking jobs on Upwork, and I was getting repeat jobs from the clients that I was working with. And I took all that money and I went and I hired Krista Nichols, who is I would consider to be the premier copywriter in our age. She's worked for Damon John the Shark. She's worked for Russell Brunson directly. She's worked for Dean Graziosi. And she saw what I wanted to do with my knowledge of storytelling and the things she was teaching me about sales psychology. And she just let me, she taught me, but at the same time, she encouraged me, build this into your own thing. And that's how I ended up in the world of value-based marketing, where now on average, within a few months of working with me, clients make $30,000+ just from implementing what we put together.
That's incredible. So out of necessity, some things were put together, and then that obviously, through hard work and elbow grease, became a much bigger thing than some side Upwork gig, sounds like.
Right. I got off Upwork as soon as I could, because
Yeah.
the clients are really demanding and they expect you to do a lot for not a lot of money.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
was like, this is a good starting place. I totally recommend it. And I found some amazing clients that way. But some other clients were just draining. And I was like, I need to do direct sales.
So you mentioned your competency and background in, was it nonfiction writing?
So I've done every kind of writing almost. I have a degree in comparative world literature. So it's just books or my friends growing up. Like I had people friends too, but I would literally stalk my parents with not just one book, but with a pile of books. And I would make my mom read the encyclopedia to me. And if she skipped a page, I would know and make her go back.
Well, yeah, that's certainly some skills there then. And so you then kind of translated that into the world of value-based marketing, and saw that like there needs to be like these skill sets need to be applied to, who's like a typical client that's using you.
I work with a lot of coaches, but I've worked with all different types of industries because the basic thing that I do is make you get really clear about your communication and what you want. And I have a holistic approach. I'm also an offer creation specialist because I realized that was a hole in my market. I would have people hiring me and they would say, okay, I want you to write copy for me. And I'm like, okay, great. what am I pointing this copy toward? Because copy has to have a specific goal. And they would be like, I don't know, I'm charging this hourly. I'm like, okay, so you have 0 offers. That's what that means.
Mm.
So I took 6 months off. I geeked out on offer creation. And then I came back, and now the approach I have is holistic, so my competitors don't like it because I work harder, I get better results, and they would rather just have their clients fill out an avatar worksheet and then write them a few lines based on that and be able to charge $5,000 to $25,000.
It's interesting you say that because, I come from the a content creation space myself. I had a done for you article writing business, and we'd work with a lot of publications, and a lot of the time it was like, just create this content and we'll monetize it on the back end or whatever. But there was no like cohesive strategy. There was no there's no why behind the content that was being created. And those were the businesses that eventually went out of business because
Right.
it's just like they just saw it as like it's a necessity. We need content, but there was really no like why behind it. So definitely, the holistic approach of like content is a gear in the entire machine.
Yes.
But you need to know what that machine is and what it does.
Right. We need to know what do we want people to do as they engage with that machine, and what end result are we hoping to get to, and how can we get them to self-qualify or self-disqualify as quickly as possible so we're not wasting anyone's time.
Yeah. So what were some of the things, I mean, you went through a lot to get to where you are today. And what were some of the, I guess, key moments along that journey that gave some of the aha moments for some of the strategies that you have today, in terms of like really knowing how to write effective copywriting? Like, were there some initial content that you were creating that just wasn't resonating until you kind of figured out some solutions?
Honestly, it's really hard to write for yourself, even if you're a copywriter. So you need those other eyes coming in. And I do that with my mentor, and we just exchange. We have an even exchange where she sends me her stuff for her business. I send her my stuff for my business because we all need to be willing to pay for objectivity. And that's something that a lot of people don't want to hear. They think, okay, well, I can write my own website copy and I'm going to outsource this content to this person. But unless we build consistency from the ground up and we're getting that outside perspective from someone with fresh eyes who doesn't see our offer the way we do, but that the purchaser sees it, we're going to put ourselves at a natural disadvantage.
Hey, Blueprint fam, if you're enjoying today's episode and finding my guest insights valuable, then you'll definitely want to subscribe to the Personal Brand Blueprint podcast as we drop weekly guest interview episodes just like this one. And on that note, you obviously also see firsthand how powerful being an effective guest, like the one you're watching on this episode right now, can be at attracting qualified, interested leads directly into your sales funnel. But I know what you're thinking. You want to get into guest podcasting, but starting feels confusing and overwhelming. What equipment do you need? And how do you look and sound great? And how do you turn listeners into leads? I know this because so many of my guests had these exact problems in the past. And that is why I created the Podcast Guest Mastery Blueprint. It's a simple but powerful breakdown on everything you need to look, sound, and convert great as a podcast guest. Everything from how to set up your recording area to what equipment you need to look and sound great on camera, and what to say on podcasts to stand out, be memorable, and earn the audience's trust. And then that one key strategy to turn listeners into leads. I'm telling you, this isn't just another checklist. This is a step-by-step blueprint to make sure you look, sound, and present your best on podcasts so you can convert that attention into leads and ultimately new business. I honestly was thinking about selling this for like $97, but I'd rather give access to this guide to my Personal Brand Blueprint podcast audience for free. So if you are ready to become a sought-after podcast guest and use it to generate leads and build your personal brand, and grab your copy of Podcast Guest Mastery Blueprint at davepoly.com/podguestblueprint. You can find the link to that in the show notes below. Again, that's davepoly.com/podguestblueprint, and start turning podcast interviews into business. Again, it's completely free for being a loyal listener, so definitely check it out. Cool? All right, let's get back to the conversation. I love that idea. I mean, I always say like a therapist needs a therapist, because we're just too attached to our own babies to be able to, like you say, we know it so well that if there's information missing, we kind of subconsciously are just like, we already know it. So whatever. But if someone who's coming in with fresh eyes who has no idea what you do, if that information's missing, they don't know it. So, they need to, fill those gaps some places. Love that. Um, Great. So let's talk about then for those of us, we're coaches, consultants, agency owners who we're really good at what we do, but we're really terrible at translating what we do into words that inspire and get our audience to take action. What are some of like the common um, issues that people are you see across the board of like people who are trying to write their own copy that they're making consistently and publishing, whether that be social or newsletters or blog posts?
Yeah, I would say the first step is to know what's copy and what's content. So we need to know the differences so that we can adjust our perspectives as far as the goals that each one has, right? We need to understand before we sit down to write, what do I want this piece to do? Who do I want this piece to engage? And that's why I have a program where it's called the Marketing Foundations Report. We go through and we build out the information that anyone who's writing for your company would need to know so that you can appear consistent and so that you know what goals you're writing for. So I think for anyone who's wanting to write their own stuff, you need to sit down and ask yourself, what is my personal mission? What is my professional mission? And how do these things show up in my business? Because when you're reaching out to people, whether it's an Instagram post or a LinkedIn message, you are going to feel discouraged. You are going to experience fatigue. And the only way for you to keep going long enough to adjust and fine tune things to where they need to be is to have that personal mission to fall back on so that you know why you're doing what you do.
So kind of the start with why approach of like vessel everything I voice into the sometimes void, but into the into the world through
Yeah.
this why.
And I would say that why is not enough because I work with lots of clients who, and I used to let people hire me who didn't know what their why was, and I would help them figure it out. And now what I do is I tell them what their why is after I talk to them for a while with clear and a brutal honesty because I've seen people pay thousands and thousands of dollars for something that they were never going to use because that offer or that content makes them super uncomfortable.
Mm,
So we need someone to be in our corner to help us understand not only what we really feel and how we can really act, but to also interpret for us the way that our purchasers are feeling. So, one of the examples of this is I always take my clients through what I call the high value skill exercise, where we sit and we make a list of their skills. I tell them, okay, we're going to make a list of your 10 skills. And then I want you to tell me which ones you think people are most willing to pay for. Not which ones are your favorite, but the ones that you think people will set down some serious cash for. And we go through that, and I'm like, okay. And I tell them at the end of this exercise, I'm like, okay, actually, these are the high value skills. And the skill that's your favorite, no one cares if you talk about, but you can still execute with that favorite skill in support of this high value skill. But this way, when you show up, people understand why you're worth giving money to, as opposed to you're talking about how your favorite thing is when your clients write poetry that you get to edit and no one's like jumping on board to give you thousands of dollars for that.
yeah. So is that kind of like just finding the key topics, subtopics, if you will, to inject into your content? Like, I know my audience will really love the way that I can help them do X or that I'm a master at X. Um, and that's something that people kind of will be willing to throw money at me for if to someone who can master that skill. So let me kind of subliminally work that into my content to kind of flex that I am able to do that. So when people read it, they go, "Oh, this person has the skill that I'm looking for."
So I would say no, you need to act like a bull charging at a red sheet with this. So actually, if you look at my LinkedIn profile, you will notice that it says copywriter about 3 times. That's not what I'm focused on. What I want people to know is that I'm in marketing because people have budgets for marketing. And I'm better than my competitors at marketing because I care so much about high value skills, because I'm an amazing and well trained copywriter. But they are not, no one is going to sign up for me to pay me thousands of dollars to figure out their high value skill. I know that's what they need, but what they want to pay for is marketing. So I actually advise my clients, and this is how I operate as well. I let the lead be the lead, and I know in the background I'm going to get to execute with the skills I love, and I don't advertise those skills.
So what I'm hearing is, and I hear this a lot from like social media coaches and whatnot. Or some people just they'll come in and they'll say like, "Hey, I need social media management," and then it's similar to kind of like the process or the funnel that people end up going to you one. Like they come in thinking that they need one thing, and it's the most typically the popular thing. It's like you might have it's like a symptom essentially. Like you go to the doctor and you're like, I need pills for this thing, and they go, whoa, 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 like let's actually examine what's going on with the body, and we'll find that, oh, wait, what you really need is something else. But so many people come in to the doctor with that common thing, like I need Tylenol for my headache, but like, no, you need to drink more water is what really you need. So is that
Right.
kind of like what I'm hearing is there's usually the common symptom that people are trying to cure, but it's really like
Yes.
what they actually need is something much larger.
And my mentor, Kristin Nichols, always says, until you speak to what they think they need, you will never gain permission to speak to what they really need.
Mm.
And I'm like, gosh, that is so. And I've seen it now being in this industry for over 5 years. I've seen it over and over again. And there's also this side to it where you can't go out and be like, I'm in this to make money. That's not a compelling reason for you. And that's not a compelling reason for anyone else. And it's hard because, especially if you own your own firm, right? You have people depending on you. You know, you need leads. You need, revenue generating activities. But if the whole thing is about let's get money, you're not going to land those sales. You're not going to be able to enroll people in high tickets. It's just not going to happen.
Mhm. Yeah, there's kind of lead with empathy, if you will, essentially. Um, yeah. So talk me through then. All right. So for those of us that want to speak to our audience's needs, obviously then we need to know our audience really well. What kind of like practices can we have in place to be able to ensure when we are leading with empathy, like how do we speak to those pain points effectively?
Yeah. So, first of all, I would say throw away your traditional ideas of what a client avatar is. I am not seeing traction with those anymore. And they were actually invented by marketing firms to serve people with marketing easier. So, they weren't to benefit the client, they weren't to benefit the person paying, they were to benefit the firms so that they would have more manageable workloads. And at this point of our time in society, demographics are no longer holding water. So that is why I am completely focused on value based marketing, which goes toward the psychographic side, but not segmented psychographics like with what giant corporations use. When I say psychographics, I mean the values, their concerns, their personalities. So if you can understand how your clients are feeling about your specific business, about your specific offer, that's when you can come in and speak to their pain. And I actually have a tool that I've developed for this that I call emotional imagery. And so we're stealing the concept of imagery from the literary world. I have a degree in comparative world literature. I'm a ghostwriter. I write thousands of words or edit thousands of words every day. So I have that as part of my, toolbox. But I realize that if we can attach a feeling to something in imagery, and that feeling is the one that your client has right now, you can create an instant and lasting connection with them. So when they feel that tug again, they're going to think of you. And that is super valuable. Like, I would consider it to be priceless.
Yeah, is that kind of I mean, that's a key element within marketing that I know there's like a famous like Kit Kat campaign a while back where they're combining eating a Kit Kat with your morning coffee. And so every time it was just like the comparison was Kit Kat and coffee was like next to each other in every ad and all that kind of stuff. So that every time you went and got your morning coffee, you immediately would be salivating for a Kit Kat. So is that kind of the concept where it's like, Pavlov's dog in a way, where it's like you hear that bell and you're thinking of food?
I mean, I would say that that's really good habit stacking. And if you've read Atomic Habits by James Clear, then you know exactly what that is that they're doing. But I would say emotional imagery is more of building up trust, which is now we've come full circle, right? Because when people need help, they want to understand that not only have you helped other people like me, but you understand how I feel. If you understand how I feel, I'm much more likely to choose you than one of your competitors.
Mm. So what are some of the areas that are kind of best suited for copywriting? I mean, are we incorporating that into our social content? Is that more suited for like just direct response landing pages, or like when and where should we be thinking about how to incorporate this?
Anytime you want something to do something as a result of seeing what you've written, that's copywriting. I don't consider that to be content. So if there's an action that you want someone to take, it could be as simple as I'm putting out an Instagram post, and for my call to action, I want people to answer this question. So I need to look at the entire post and say, is what I've written compelling them to take the action I want them to take? So it can turn any piece of content into copy as long as you know what the goal of that piece of writing is. And if you're more purposeful about setting goals for these call to actions, for this copy, you're going to see different results than if you're just throwing language out there and hoping it's going to land.
Yeah. And I know when we're creating our content and we're creating like sales content, sometimes we can feel a bit like icky about being promotional and it doesn't feel like it sounds like us. How do we thread that needle in the sense of it being still our voice? We're
Yeah.
using the words we would naturally use, but we also have to be somewhat selective of the words we use because we do want to like motivate and inspire. How do we kind of thread that needle between this, sales and, you know, pure voice?
Authentic.
Yeah.
Right. Authentic. Yeah. So I'm going to quote Rachel Peterson, who is like the social queen. She made content marketing into what it is, I feel. And she said in a workshop that I was at live, and I like this hit me like a ton of bricks. She said, if you know you can help someone and you don't get out there and tell them you can help them and you mean it and you care, someone else is going to get in front of them and say, I can help you. And they're going to take their money and they're not going to care as much as you do. And that's what I needed. As an empathetic person, sales felt gross to me until I realized that what she said was 100% true. And that also gives you permission to show up as your authentic self because you're like, all right, I know I can help this person because I care this much. But if I really want to get them the best results, I'm going to show up as my full self so they can see if our personalities are compatible or not, because I don't want to work with someone whose personality isn't compatible with mine just because of money, because then the results are not going to be the same.
Yeah. Now, let's talk briefly, because before the call, we mentioned how often we talk about AI on podcasts and such, but it's talking about content creation and not bringing up AI is these days is um, you know uh, it's necessary. So, in what areas, steps in the content creation, if at all, do you use or advise others to incorporate AI into the content creation workflow?
Yeah, so I always say that AI is a tool to be used, not a replacement for humans. And because they can't teach AI to be empathetic, they have tried and failed. And I also spent months testing myself with my sales psychology knowledge against AI. Every time I wrote a piece, I would have AI write a piece with a really specific good prompt. I wanted to see if AI would win, right? So I set it up to succeed, and I was never able to get the same results with AI that I could get with my training. So that's why I would say AI is and can be a very useful tool if you are not depending upon it to be able to sound fully like you. Because, like, the other thing that I do is I'm a ghostwriter. That means I download someone's voice into my brain and I write as them. That's very difficult. And that's a high value skill because not everyone can do it. And so, why are we expecting AI without access to empathy to be able to do that? It's impossible. However, I do use AI every day. I use Opus Clips to add subtitles to my videos. I use ChatGPT for title ideation, right? I'll be like, give me 20 titles that are 3 words long on this topic based on this text. And then I put it in there, and some of the things it gives me are horrific. Some of the things that it gives me are thoughtful, and some of them can be adapted to what I want them to be. So I think it is useful as an idea generation tool. I think it can be useful for putting out social media as far as we know there are blockers, right? Like I used to use Metricool all the time. I loved it. And then all of a sudden, nothing on any of my platforms was getting seen by anybody. And I'm like, oh, they figured out the Metricool algorithm and now they're blocking it. So, but then at the same time, like I thought my Instagram account was shadow banned, and we did some tests and we found out if we publish with Opus Clips, we get 5 times the views, right? So you just have to be open to testing. And that's the same with writing and especially copywriting. We have to be open to testing everything to see how it works for us and get really curious about how it can help us, because that turns off judgment and we're much more open to different possibilities that way.
Yeah, I love this this having this conversation with you specifically, being that you are a ghostwriter. And so, as you mentioned, you do you're the human version of what many people are doing with AI,
They're
essentially,
trying to
right?
do, yes,
Yeah.
ineffectively.
So what, like, you kind of spoke to it in a bit where you was like, I have to download a person's essence into my brain and then act as them with content. But the value for you is you're acting as them, but you have the skill sets that they wish they had,
Yes.
to create quality content. Yeah, what are those things that you think AI is just missing or isn't good at, that you specifically or ghostwriters in general just are able to harness innately? Like what's the disconnect between a human and AI when it comes to that step of ghostwriting in both cases?
Yeah, so I would say that in the context of understanding someone else to where I can write for them, there's back and forth, which means I'm going to get things wrong and that person can give me additional context. With AI, we are not able to build context for it or with it. And so that's why we see things like AI not ethically sourcing things or misquoting facts, because AI cannot gain context in the way that humans can. And I think that's one of the things that's unique about us as a species as well. Like the depth of context that we can internalize and then go back and forth about is mind boggling when we think about it. It's exponentially infinite.
Yeah, there's forget where I heard this example. Maybe you've heard of it as well. But there was this idea. There's one copywriter or writer who recently had um, a child born, and he was there just to witness their child being born, and he prompted AI with as much information as possible and said, "Give me a description of that moment," and then had it write out like 1,000 words about that event, and then he did the same and wrote out his recollection of what happened,
Yeah.
and just the stark difference in what AI and what he was able to write. Like his just had so much more emotion and like romance in the language and just detail and everything, that you would feel like you were there with him at the time, versus what AI is trying to do is portray and act as a human and guess at what's going on. So when we talk about like speaking, empathy and talking about what your audience is going through, a lot of times our audience, who are coaches, consultant, agency owners,
Yeah.
they went through these same problems that they're now helping their client solve. And so they talk about recollecting the past experience and like
Yes.
driving those emotions when it comes to their content. It's very difficult to, I would assume, a robot
For AI.
to, to replicate
Yes,
that.
they don't understand, and the robots don't understand struggle. And that's one of our unique human experiences. And we know that struggles are often painted as negative things, but struggles make us who we are. They give us the opportunity to overcome. And when we're speaking to those struggles to the people who need our help, who are on the struggle bus at this very moment, we're endearing ourselves to them and connecting to them in a way that shows, hey, I'm not perfect, just like you're not perfect, but I know how to help where you are right now.
Yeah. And this, we say people buy first with emotion and then later with logic. And so, yeah, speaking to that emotion, it's important that we know how to speak to that. So let's touch on that then briefly. When we want to, we know what our clients' pains are. A lot of times we went through the same struggles
Yeah.
ourselves. So that's why we know. When translating that into content, how do we like properly express that into a piece of content that will get the result that we want? And I know that's kind of a loaded question because it could be depends on what it is, but like how do we first start thinking about like the format of that content and what words we want to use? Like talk us through your process of when you're doing that.
Yeah, I actually do have a framework for this that I use with my clients, and it's going to be in my new book that is
Nice.
hopefully coming out sometime this year. Man, there's been a lot of delays, but I'm hopeful that it will happen. But I call it the story of failure. So you need to figure out where your client is right now and think about what it felt like for you when you were trying to get there and the first big failure that you encountered about halfway between starting and getting to that point. That is your story. That's what you want to share with them. And I will tell you only about 3 times out of hundreds of times of doing this with clients does someone say, I will be glad to talk about my failures. I would love to talk about my struggles. They think they need to appear as this impenetrable fortress to the person who needs their help. And I have a way of not only convincing them that this is the thing they should be doing, but getting them excited to talk about failure because I remind them this person wants to know that you overcame failure, not that you were born the perfect version of what they need to be. And when they know that you overcame it and you talk honestly and authentically about that, you are much more likely to gain their trust than if you try to present yourself as this polished, unhuman expert.
Yeah, I love that. There's this content. I'm a big comic book superhero guy, right?
Oh, me too.
All right, cool. So
I
you
mean,
probably
but
already
girl,
know
you
this
can see
reference,
I
but
have
like,
my Professor Hulk right there.
oh, dope, dope. I just moved into I'm still building out my office here, but there'll be plenty back here soon. But yeah, the concept of of Superman, how early on they built this like impenetrable superhuman, and he didn't have any flaws, and
Yeah,
so it while the stories are great and you kind of saw this like, wow, it'd be great to be Superman, the audiences couldn't like connect to the stories because he can never lose. There was no way to kill this guy. So, that's when they incorporated kryptonite and they needed
right.
something to like make this person seem more human. And we're going super nerdy here, but
I love it.
the new Superman movie that's coming out. One of the first scenes that this James Gunn is like directing this movie, and
Yeah.
one of the first scenes in the new trailer is Superman laying in the snow, bloody, and I think the reason that they did that was to be like, this is someone you can connect with. It's not going to be like your impenetrable superhero. Like they need to humanize a person who's yeah, otherwise invincible. So
Right.
yeah, you don't want to show up as Superman all the time. People can connect to that. You need to
No.
like show the kryptonite moments for the people to be like, okay, yeah, this person does bleed too, just like me.
Well, and I would say, since we're talking about nerdy things in James Gunn, that Guardians of the Galaxy series is like my absolute favorite. And they're the underdogs. Everyone loves an underdog story. So if you can share those moments in your life where you were able to overcome, like just think about what I shared. I talked about potentially having pipes burst in my house in a real estate investment that obviously we couldn't predict all the schools would close down. Like that was an underdog situation for me. There's no reason I should have been able to make the $1,000 in the 10 days to pay my heating bill. But that's real. And because it happened, I can talk about it in an authentic way. And it makes me seem more approachable to people who would otherwise find me pretty intimidating because of my breadth of knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah. And going back to what you're saying, where people are just afraid to talk about those failures, but really it's the failures that people relate to the most and are largely the reason that people listen. First of all, it makes good storytelling. So if you want
Yeah.
people to listen to your story, you need some stakes in the process.
Yes. And I would say, because I'm huge on storytelling, but people are always like, are you into story brand? I'm not into story brand. I do not like it. And the reason why is because they're missing a few key elements. Every story needs a beginning, a middle, and an end, even if you only have 500 words, even if you only have 200 words. And you also need to use the story to point to something, a concrete way to give you money if you are in business. So
Mm,
storytelling is vital, but you need to have the systems around it and you need to make sure you're honoring what a story is by not just leaving people on a ledge holding on to their tension.
yeah, love it. Well, Kristen, this has been great. Is there any final points of emphasis that you want to throw an exclamation mark here on at the end?
I would say if you were listening to me talk about your high value skills and you're like, I don't really know what that is, you can go to literarysymmetry.com/get paid sign up and you will be able to get my high value, I mean, your high value skill masterclass for free. So you can show up, you can watch the training, and you'll be able to identify your own high value skill quickly so that anything you write reflects that.
Love it. After this, I'm going there and signing up. So there'll be a link in the show notes below. Definitely check that out. Kristen, this has been awesome. Any final words for everyone?
I would say, so I always say this at the end of anything I write or I record. You are amazing, dear listener. You are completely capable and your business story matters.
Perfect way to sign off. Kristen, thank you so much for being on the show. Today, we learned about my guest's origin story, unique methods, and credibility. If you want to see me break down how today's guest can use those tools within the personal brand blueprint strategy to attract, convince, and convert new qualified leads so you can do the same for your business, then check out this episode here. Or if you want to continue to hear more incredible personal branding origin stories and learn more valuable personal branding skills from my awesome guests, then check out the full playlist of interviews here.